Okay, we'll make a start. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you for making time to come today. Thank you very much. I'm David James, and it's my great privilege to be Director for the ESRC Wales Doctoral Training Centre, or DTC for short. And on behalf of the steering group, I'd like to thank you for coming to this event, which marks the launch of the centre, even though, as you may expect, it's been running for some time. I also want to thank someone who will join us shortly, Leighton Andrews AM, for sponsoring today's event, perhaps to the St David's Day group for providing the resources for today's event, and also, I think most importantly, to my colleagues Carol Baker and Janet Robinson, who I'm sure you've seen on your way in, for doing so much of the hard work to make it happen. Okay. As you'll see from the programme, we've got a few short speeches coming up, and those folk will be introduced at the appropriate time. I wanted to start by saying just a few general things about the Wales Doctoral Training Centre, which I hope will give a background to why we're here. As I expect you already know, the Wales DTC is a collaborative arrangement, and it's between the universities of Aberystwyth, Bangor, Cardiff and Swansea. As one of only 21 DTCs, it contains a significant portion of the highest quality doctoral research training anywhere in the UK. And as a result, it's permitted to spend some of the precious public money that is still available for via the research councils, and in this case the ESRC in particular, for supporting the best quality doctoral training for social scientists. The DTC is also supported by the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, and I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Philip Gummett, the Chief Exec of HEFCU, who is here. Now, I'm sure that in present company I don't need to spend any time justifying the need for the social sciences, so I won't do that. But I will just repeat something that I heard Professor Paul Boyle say recently. As some of you will know, Professor Paul Boyle was a Swansea academic, now Chief Executive of the ESRC, and also recently elected President of a body called Science Europe. Professor Boyle pointed out that something that we all hear a lot about, climate change, is conventionally seen as a science problem. But it is now as much a social science problem as a science problem. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that no matter how good the science, and it is very good, pretending that climate change is merely or only a science problem is a surefire way to see matters get worse. Social science, of course, is actually a very broad collection of disciplines or fields. And I wanted to mention that this is reflected in the makeup of the DTC. It consists of some accredited pathways. Very briefly, these are bilingualism, criminology, economics, which includes business economics, banking and finance, education, environmental planning, human geography, language-based area studies, linguistics, management and business studies, political science and international studies, psychology, science and technology studies, social policy, social work, social care, socio-legal studies, and sociology. Quite a list. All of these pathways, by the way, in our DTC have deep roots in terms of the quality of their research and the volume of their research. But as well as being a range of disciplines or fields of study, social science also embraces a wide variety of topics and methods and theoretical approaches. For example, in banking and finance, a contemporary doctoral study might well examine the development of a specific financial product for a specific market. Or it might do something else, which would be rather more broad, which would be whether new forms of governance or regulation could do anything to change elements of the culture in the global business of banking. In my own field, which is the application of sociology to education, we might have a study perhaps looking at the reason for persistent social inequalities in educational attainments. or another one which looks at international comparisons between qualifications, and yet another one which asks how teachers might be more creative. So you can get, even inside a discipline, an enormous breadth. And this brings me to mention the slight paradox or tension that always resides in doctoral study, that it's usually highly focused, quite specialised in what it deals with, and achieves great depth, and hopefully, well, one would expect, leads to an original contribution to knowledge. But at the same time, it must provide a broad and rounded training as a social scientist. And in the last 10 years or so, various initiatives have confronted that very tension, and in fact the 4 universities involved in the DTC have done a great deal to tackle that, to make sure both sides of that tension are addressed. And the DTC must, as it were, continue that work. So we want doctoral students in the social sciences to be even more equipped than they've been in the past to deal with a variety of methods, a range of theories, approaches, topics. Also being able to engage with quite a wide range of audiences and purposes. And indeed, collaboration and partnership are vital parts of what the DTC is about. And I think Dr. Grant will be mentioning that to some extent in a little while. So, a final few words from me. Today's launch underlies, I think, the importance of the ESRC Wales Doctoral Training Centre for the future, actually, of social science in Wales and indeed the UK. And I think this is vital. The social sciences are increasingly significant, I would say, as we try to find a way through the most troubling issues of our times, one of which I've mentioned already, but we could add economic recession, crises in the banking industry, perhaps rising social inequalities, incidentally something that recently Barack Obama said was the defining issue of our age, and standards of practice perhaps that might apply in public office or in the police or in the judiciary or in journalism perhaps. I'm sure you can think of plenty more. These kinds of issues are very often the ones that social science can give a fresh take, an illumination, a different view, which is not necessarily vested in sets of interests that surround those practices. And to add to that point briefly, last week I was reading something rather worrying. It was the latest report by Democratic Audit, which is sponsored by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. And the report comes out every few years, and it records the rise and fall of various indicators. And it said that whilst there are some things to celebrate, including devolution, it nevertheless concludes that the state of democracy in Britain as a whole is currently in some sort of long-term terminal decline. For me, this diagnosis underlines the importance of a healthy social science research base. If you like, a healthy social science research base is a sign that we live in a democratic society. And by democratic society, I'm not just talking about voting, although that's important, nor am I talking about something that's finished and fixed and has a sort of well-rounded definition surrounding it. It's something rather more like a process in which there's always the possibility of challenge, of development, of change through well-informed dialogue and debate. And I see the social scientist as crucial in that, offering a degree of independence and criticality, evidence analysis and so on, which takes any area of concern beyond its immediate professional or political interests. So if that's right, or if it's at least half right, then it's vital that the next generation of social scientists have breadth as well as depth, are confident in engaging with a range of audiences and interests, whilst also being independent and critical thinkers who understand and embrace their responsibilities in a democracy. And I think that as a doctoral training centre, we've an enormous contribution to make to that vision and that task. So thank you for listening. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Phil Subin, who's Director of Policy at the Economic and Social Research Council. Thank you.